Hello everyone, welcome to Dream Retirement in Mexico. I'm your host, Taniel Chemsian, and we're here in sunny Puerto Vallarta. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Jessica Riedesser from Riedesser and Associates. I've been using Jessica's law firm for over 15 years now, and she's helped hundreds of our clients close on their home right here in Paradise. She's going to be discussing with us all the ins and outs of the closing process, what is a real estate trust, how does a notary function in the closing, and so much more. She's a fountain of information. I can't wait to get started, so let's go. Hey Jessica, thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
So Jessica, before we start, I'm sure our viewers want to know, who are you, how long you've been here, and what you do.
My name is Jessica Riedesser. I'm an attorney. I've been working here in Puerto Vallarta for around 24 years. Incredible. Time flies by. And I'm a real estate attorney, so I can help you with all of your closings.
And you have, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, you're one of the first real estate attorneys that I used in PV when I started almost 18 years ago.
Wow,
So
time flies by.
Time flies, yeah. I don't have any gray hairs back then, Jessica. I have
Did
a lot.
you? Not?
All right, one of the first things my foreign clients ask me is, how can I own a property in Mexico? So they're kind of like the whole country. And so can you explain to us what are the options for foreigners?
Okay, so foreigners, it's different depending on what area in the country you are. If you're on the coast area or the border area, it's a little bit different. 50 kilometers from the ocean, you have to buy through a bank trust. We call fideicomiso, very hard word.
Yeah.
And internally in the country, you can buy directly. We have to get a permit of foreign affairs, just a notice, basically, inland, and a notice from foreign affairs relation, public relation, to be able to purchase on the coastline and the borderline.
Right. So Puerto Vallarta is on the coastline.
Correct.
So all our foreign clients here have to have a real estate trust, right? A fideicomiso. So what is that process like? What does that entail? Who are the parties of the trust?
So basically in the fideicomiso, we have buyer, seller, we have a bank involved. The
Okay.
bank is the one that holds the property in trust. The foreigner owns the rights to the property. Always a Mexican institution. We have different banks to choose from. We have some better banks, some slower banks, but it's a very simple process. And in this trust, you can also designate your substitute beneficiaries that comes in above any will or any other designation that you may have. Okay. So that can be designated right in your trust.
So speaking of beneficiaries, so let's say there's a couple purchasing, so they could both be the primary beneficiary, right?
The primary owners,
Primary
yes.
owners, all right. So do most couples have 50%, 50% each?
You know, that really depends on what the couples want. They can purchase 10, 90, 80, 20, whatever they want, equal parts. That's their decision. It doesn't really matter. But to designate their substitutes, they can choose to designate each other in first place, or just designate their substitute beneficiaries. If, for example, a second marriage and they have their own children, they can designate down directly. Okay. Or just they can say each other in first place. Only if something happens to both, then we'll designate these in any percentage, and it can be as many as they want. Preferably, designate individuals. Sometimes they want to designate, for example, a trust from the US or Canada. That is not really a legal entity that is recognized here in Mexico because it's a private document there. But in some cases, when it's not too complex, when it is individuals and they don't designate corporations or these companies that are for benefits, then the banks will accept. But not every bank will accept a trust as a beneficiary.
A foreign trust.
A foreign
like a
trust.
living trust or something.
Exactly.
Because I have clients, they sometimes say, I have a living trust in Illinois, so can my living trust be the primary beneficiary of the property here in Vallarta? So what you're saying is that's not advisable, and some Mexican banks won't allow that.
Some Mexican banks won't, but some will, as I mentioned, if it's not too complex. Okay. And in that case, we do need documentation that must be apostilled. This is basically by the Secretary of State, and it gives a legality in this country to the document. And then we have to do a translation. Once that is all processed and we have the apostilles and all, some banks will accept if it's not too complex, but it's not a problem. The important issue is that when you're buying a property, funds have to come from whoever is going to be on title.
Got it.
Right? So if you're buying it through the living trust, it needs to come from that trust account.
From the bank account for that
Correct.
living trust.
That has the name of the living trust. If it comes as a personal individual, then it should be in the name of that personal individual. Because sometimes we get that confusion. And I buy it as an individual, but my money came from the trust. And that's when we have to prove, because of money laundering, all of these documents, and it just becomes a little bit more of a hassle.
Well, sometimes that reminds you, I've got a client who, let's say, is purchasing, and their father or mom is lending them money to purchase. So in that case, would you say it's best for the parent to wire the money to the kid's account, okay, and then that person who's the buyer wires it into like Mexico?
It could be an option. Worst case scenario, if they don't want to transfer to the children's account or to whoever's purchasing, we have to create a file on the person that is funding. So basically getting identification, utility bill, general information form, and having them sign, just so we know that the money is coming from legal sources.
In the event of an audit or something.
Exactly.
So, okay, cool. Now, going to the substitute beneficiaries, so are there any kind of restrictions for that, who you're not allowed to leave it to?
No, you can designate whoever you want. You can designate
Can you
and
designate a
then
charity?
revoke.
Like a charity?
You can, but if it's a corporation, we need more documentation. But yes, you can designate whoever you want. You can designate your children today, and then you don't like them anymore. You can change them.
That's happened.
It happens.
Or you have another kid.
Exactly.
A
grandchild, whoever you, so you can revoke and modify and add. It's very simple, but you always have to do it with the bank's involvement, with the notary public, because remember, every transaction here has to be done in regards to real estate with a notary public.
Yeah. So notary in Mexico is quite different than a notary in the States and Canada.
Completely.
I think in California, you have to be at least 18 years old. You have to take a course from the Secretary of State. You take an exam and you pay, and that's basically it. If you pass. Yeah. But in Mexico, it's totally the opposite.
I think the big difference is also that you get like a commission for certain years in the US, right? And here you become a notary public and it's for life. But it's not only to certify a signature, it's to do real estate transactions, recording, paying basically at the city hall, the transfer tax, the public registry. The notary is the one that retains this amount and pays it, right? So they have a designation that is basically for life. They can be revoked if you do something incorrectly, but basically it's like, I think, the same category as a judge, for example, that you get that designation. So it's a very important figure here in Mexico.
Yeah. And are there like unlimited notaries in a city?
Well, they do put a certain amount of notaries for the population of the different states. Okay. We have, I think, about 10 in Vallarta. Yeah. And Bahía de Banderas is a different state, right? Nayarit. So we have Puerto Vallarta, we have Jalisco, Nayarit, all in one. So we do have many notaries as options. Yeah.
So are there any any cons with getting a trust? Because sometimes I mentioned to clients you need a trust here along the coastline, and they don't get that concept there. They kind of makes them nervous. Should they be nervous?
No, I mean, nervous we should be back then in the olden days when we still didn't really recognize trust, and people would have to buy in the name of a Mexican citizen. And as I always say, today they're your friend, but tomorrow who knows, right? Yeah. So it is important to have a trust because there you're protected, right? And the most important is that you can designate your substitute beneficiaries, and it's a very simple process to be recognized, right? They will have to pay transfer tax to put it in their name, but there's no probate process. So it's a very simple and easy process. Okay,
so what you're talking about is in the event that the primary beneficiaries pass away.
Exactly.
So yeah, so talk me through that step. So let's just say a couple owns it, they designate each other. In the event one passes away, the surviving spouse is now 100% primary beneficiary, and that person is gone. So let's say there are two kids, they're the substitutes. So walk me through the steps. So what do the kids have to do in order for them to be recognized now as the new primary beneficiaries?
So basically, if there's a couple that bought 50-50, one of them passes, the other one doesn't automatically become 100%, right? We have to do the process to recognize, because she or he owns 50%, we have to recognize them for the other 50% to consolidate the 100.
So the deceased 50%, there's a process that needs to go to the survivor. Okay.
Only if both pass, then the heirs would come into place. So what is that process? When there's a passing, the substitute beneficiary would have to present the death certificate. If the passing takes place in the States or in Canada, apostilled by the Secretary of State, right? This is according to the Convention of La Haya. There's many countries involved, and this is what gives validation in Mexico or in other countries that this is a true and valid document. Once we receive that, we send to the bank with a letter of instruction. I'm the substitute. Very important. Substitute beneficiaries have to have a passport, yes or yes.
Okay.
And we do the recognition. At that time, I get recognized and I can change my substitute beneficiaries or I can sell simultaneously. Simple process. There's always cost to do so, but the bank and the notary always are involved.
So every time you're making a modification, regardless if you're changing the beneficiaries or someone's passed away, you have to acquire the beneficiary rights. The bank, their trust bank, and the notary, there's a cost involved.
Of course. And they always have to participate, yes.
So let's talk about these costs. So what's like the typical closing cost when you're purchasing a property through a trust?
So approximately, I would say it could be 4 to 6% of the purchase price.
Okay.
It all
Is that nationwide?
No.
That's just
Because-
like the coastline?
Exactly, on the
Okay.
coastline. Because it's transfer tax, the permit of foreign affairs, we need to verify at the city hall, public registry, certain documents, that everything is in order, right? That we don't have any liens on the property and so on. So all that verification and those expenses will be included in that 4 to 6%, I would say. The highest is the transfer tax.
Transfer tax.
But then we have property tax that is an annual fee, and that is not very expensive. So it sort of compensates that a little bit.
I would say property tax, jokingly,
I
it's
know.
almost free. I mean, it's relatively speaking compared
Here
to
it's in
this.
pesos and there it's in dollars, the same amount, right?
Yeah. Well, I think my brother pays around $10,000 a year in property tax. If
That's
not
what I'm
more.
saying. There would be $10,000 here, maybe 10,000 pesos.
10,000 pesos,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's really nothing.
And if you pay at the beginning of the year, you get an additional discount, like 15%, right? If you pay in the month of January. So you have that benefit also.
As if things weren't good enough already.
Maybe that's why we have a lot of cobblestone.
Well, that's charming though. That's Vallarta for you.
It is.
And speed bumps.
Mhm.
A lot of speed bumps in this town. So, are there any itemized expenses from the buyer's closing costs that they can like recuperate at some point when they sell?
That are deductible, you mean?
Deductible,
So basically that would be transfer tax,
And that's the biggest expense.
public yeah, transfer tax is high,
Okay.
but that always will be the biggest expense. The important thing is to get, it's like a legal invoice, CFDI. So once that is paid, it's important to download the transfer tax CFDI. So then you can use that when you sell for deduction purposes.
So how does the buyer obtain that? I mean, does a notary send them an email, or how does
The
that work?
notary's going to, once you close, you have to obtain certain documents,
Okay.
right? So we do the closing. First, you have that whole process of verifying everything, always, hire your consul to do so, to review. And then once the closing takes place, it's important to always pick up your original deed. That takes about, let's say, 4 to 5 months to get recorded, maybe less, but you have to pick it up from the notary. The notary is not going to send it to you, right? So either you authorize somebody to pick it up on your behalf, or you go directly and pick
So I
it up.
mean, after you close, you sign the deed.
Mhm.
All right. So then it goes to public registry. So you said your original deed, it's when it comes out of the public registry.
Exactly.
And that takes how long?
About 4 to 5 months.
And it's not a guarantee that you're going to receive a notification.
You're not going to receive a notification. This is something you just have to
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
We don't give notifications
Yeah.
a lot here, right? I mean, property tax, no one's going to give you a little bill and say, hey, remember to pay your property tax. No, you just have to put that on your calendar. Every January, pay your property tax, your electricity, I mean, telephone. How many times did I receive that bill?
No.
Never. I mean, what did I do? I remembered to pay once my electricity was cut off. So, I mean, basically, you just have to know it's every 2 months or every month when you get these bills. It's going to be on the same expiry date every month or 2 months, right? Depending, electric can be every month or every 2 months. You just have to remember, I have telephone every month. I have electricity every month. I have this. No one's going to say, hey, time to pay.
It's a business cultural thing here. I think the thought is it's your bill, it's your expense, it's your responsibility to remember to pay it.
I think that the service of notifications here, it doesn't work. Like mail.
Yeah.
We don't really receive mail, so we don't have a lot of junk mail. You see no mailboxes anyway.
Oh, at my mom's house in LA, I mean, every time I
Exactly.
go, there's so much junk mail. It's crazy. No, here, never.
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 We don't
Not in
have that
Vallarta, at least.
because I called the telephone company saying, "Hey, why am I not getting my bills?" Oh, we changed companies to deliver the bills and it didn't work. Well, that was it. I never got it. I think I had it for 1 year and then never again.
Never happened again.
So you just do paperless.
Yeah.
Download the applications on your app. You can pay electricity. You can pay telephone. Very simple, but no reminders until they cut off your service. Then, that will be your reminder.
Yeah. No, I've experienced that in the past.
Yeah.
But now I think Mexico's caught up a lot in the digital era. So all these apps are there,
Yeah.
and you could download them, and you get your notifications to pay. So it makes life a lot easier. Really quick, Jessica, going back to like the post-closing actions that an owner has to take. So the legal invoice, right, the CFDI. So that's what's on there exactly. Why is that document so important?
So the first is pick up your original deed, right? And then you're going to get the CFDIs. This is like the...
So CFDI stands for Comprobante Fiscal Digital de Internet, right?
Yeah, this is basically like a legal invoice that allows you to credit that price. You get it if you're doing improvements on your property and you're remodeling, you're going to need that. It's an invoice because here, if you just get a simple receipt saying, I received this amount as payment, that's not valid for deductions, right? We have to prove to the government, yes, we paid it, they received it, and here's my factura. These are all digitals, you're going to keep it. When the notary closes, you're at the notary, you sign the deed, all the transfer tax and registry and all the fees are paid. Then the notary is going to record that, but also he has to send you the CFDI, that is this legal invoice, and that proves the purchase price sale, right? So that not only the deed that has your price on it will be necessary. When you go to sell, to credit your purchase price, you need to get the CFDI. Okay. And this will come digitally. Responding to your question, it has the deed number, it has the names of the parties, it has the price of the property, and the basically the...
So another name for the CFDI is a what's it called?
Comprobante de identificación fiscal, basically.
Yeah.
Fiscal.
The complementary invoice, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
When a developer or a corporation, a Mexican corporation sells, the Mexican corporation has to issue it.
Like the accountant will issue it.
The accountant of the corporation, but it's not the notary's responsibility. It's the corporation.
So the notary issues it when you're buying it from
an individual.
An individual.
Either Mexican or foreign.
Okay, and if you're purchasing from like a Mexican corporate, like in Vallarta, we have a lot of pre-construction.
Yeah.
And they're being built by Mexican corporations.
Exactly.
Right. So in that instance, the corporation, the accountant, or someone from the company will issue this factura. Now, will they issue it after the closing, or because in pre-construction typically people are paying installments, right? That's why they're getting the great discount, is because they're paying in installments, and those installment payments are generally attached to a milestone of construction, meaning like the foundation is done, they get this much. Up to the third floor structure is done, they get the buyer wires this much. So is the developer obligated to issue a factura for each installment, or can they just do it at the end when they actually sign the deed over?
Usually what I see is they do it at the end.
Okay.
I mean, that can be their decision, but usually at the end, because they put the full amount, and what they do is, because normally it's all stated in dollars, and then they receive, and then they convert to pesos. So they're going to give you the exchange rate that they used in each installment, or the one that they received, and that will be added to be your full purchase price. And all of these payments, when you're making them, it's important to keep. Why? Because we have to document it for money laundering purposes, and we have to state in the deed, it was paid by this, from this account, to this account, and on this date. So it's really important to always document and keep every payment that you make.
So if they're making these installment payments, or if they're just wiring into escrow, which we'll get to in a second, so keep the wire confirmation when your bank sent to the designated bank where the money is being sent to. So keep that, and then get a receipt from the developer or from escrow that they receive the funds. So you should have both of those, because I have a lot of clients who are not very good with keeping digital files,
Yes.
and they forget, and they email it to us, and sometimes our email server goes down or something goes wrong. So it's really important for everyone to have a better, I think, filing system to
I know.
keep all of these, right?
It is important.
It's very important.
Because sometimes it takes a couple of years in pre-construction by the time you close, and then where are these receipts and no one can find them. It is important to document them because the notary will ask for them.
And then what happens with these big developers is they have people coming and going. So, that some employee when they first started construction, but that employee has moved on to somewhere else.
I've had issues where they changed accountants at the middle of the project, and then they take a long time to obtain these documents. So, yeah.
Takes a while to, so it's a good practice
Yep.
for the buyers just to keep a good digital filing system of some sort, right?
Exactly.
So let's go to escrow. We use escrow here in Vallarta, but that's not common throughout Mexico. And escrow here is quite different than escrow. I mean, escrow here, they just basically hold the funds like a bank, and they disperse. They have no other integral role in the closing process. So, but if, let's say there's a foreigner buying in Guadalajara, Mexico City, where they're going to look at you and go, what, escrow? We don't use escrow. So how is the money handled? Typically, like how do Mexicans transfer money for a real estate purchase, and how safe is that?
So here in Vallarta, as you say, with the escrow, and I've worked with some notaries out of Puerto Vallarta, and they tell me it's like you live in your own little country using escrows. That for me, it feels like it's very secure. But unbelievable. In Mexico City, Guadalajara, between Mexicans, they even transfer their 10%
Directly to the seller?
Directly to the seller prior to closing, and then the balance at closing without using escrow. But I would suggest, if you're going to do it that way, do a certified check, a Mexican check. Obviously, that's what they would want, not a U.S. check. But, get a certified check or a cheque de caja that we call it. And then
What is that?
It's like a certified check as well, but it's funds that are secure.
So certified checks you can only get from the banks, or
From the
are
banks.
there different financial institutions? Only from the banks?
The banks.
The banks. Okay.
And then leave it with the notary maybe. So the notary can keep that 10%.
And you make the check, do you make the certified check out to the seller?
To the seller.
And the notary just holds it? Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
And then the notary holds it, and at closing, then they will get the full balance. You can do 2 certified checks, one for the 10%, that is the usual down payment, and then 90% for the balance. But it is questionable amongst the Mexicans because they do like to receive the down payment to have that security that, you will buy the property, you won't back out.
So in Vallarta, do you typically see that still? Like they do leave a certified check if they're not using escrow?
I have seen that.
Yeah. And that's typical with Mexican buyers and sellers.
Correct.
Right? For foreigners,
they feel more comfortable. Yeah.
But again, like places like Guadalajara, Mexico City, or maybe San Miguel de Allende, if they don't use escrow, you would say, don't freak out. There are alternative means of purchasing and acquiring.
Exactly. It's not obligatory. I mean, it doesn't even exist really in Mexico, right? The same as title insurance.
Right.
Doesn't really exist here. The notary has to do his verification, and we give a notice to the public registry, but title insurance isn't obligatory.
When the notary does that verification, like how far back do they go looking at the title?
And we just go back to the previous title.
Oh, previous title.
No, you don't go all the way back.
Okay.
Every title gets recorded under a certain number, and you have to verify today. Who is the owner? Are there any liens on the property? And we give a notice, and that freezes it for a time period.
What do you mean by freezes it?
It doesn't allow any other notes to come into the public registry office. So once you put that notice, it's called aviso cautelar, and then when we finish, aviso preventivo, this pretty much immobilizes the property. So no liens can come in the meantime when I'm having a transaction between a buyer and seller.
That's good to know.
Yes, and this is obligatory, right? We have to do it, and it comes out in the certificate of no liens also. So that protects. The only one that does not protect would be labor issues. So that's why it's always important that if there are employees on the property,
like a cleaning lady,
a gardener, somebody that works for you on the property, do the proper letter of termination before the labor board, right? Because they have rights to come back and it's attached to the property, not to the owner.
So is that only, well, what if I have a property management company and the cleaning lady or cleaning person is hired through the property management company?
Well, that's the property manager because they have a contract with that person.
Okay, all right. So the employees, like my cleaning lady, I pay her directly.
Exactly.
So if
it would
I'm
be your responsibility.
my responsibility. So if I'm selling my condo, which I may down the road, I need to go to labor board
Correct.
and then pay her all her benefits that she's accumulated. She's
Over
with
the
me
years.
over the years.
Yeah.
And then she's paid. So does she have to go to labor board to get paid there?
Yes.
Is that how it works? Okay. So walk me through that process. So I'm selling.
Mhm.
So the labor board does the calculations, I'm assuming, or do I hire somebody to do
We
it?
get an accountant that can do the calculation, and it depends on how many years they've worked for you. They get their corresponding percentage, and then at the labor board, they sign an agreement, and that way they cannot come forward,
Okay.
right?
And so that paid receipt, signed receipt, so we hand that, like a copy of that at the closing to the buyer?
Correct.
It's called finiquito, right?
Finicky.
That's what you guys call finiquito. We have those in our purchase sale contracts over here.
We always put them in.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
But it doesn't always happen, so it is important that.
Yeah, that's interesting you brought that up. I was selling a property.
Mhm.
My seller had a maid. She was
Mhm.
paying directly. So she told her, hey, we need to go to the labor board to liquidate so I could pay your severance. The woman freaked out and she never went back. The cleaning lady, the employee. So what do you do?
Yeah.
You know, she just kind of thought that, you know, she was going to get in trouble by going to a labor board. You know, she saw labor board and she freaked out and she just never went back. So in an instant like that, is there a document that the seller can sign? Or is there a recommendation? Not that that's going to guarantee anything.
It's not going to guarantee anything because she can come back later and say, you know, I worked here so many years, and I mean, I guess you could go to the labor board and say this person was supposed to appear, didn't appear.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
But yes, definitely. Exactly.
Yeah, because there are scenarios where.
Yeah, I've never heard that one.
Yeah.
Because normally they do want that because they want their amount.
Yes.
Corresponding by law, right, for the years that they.
Well, people hear like an authority, like a government office or something, and they freak out, and they think they're in trouble, and they're not. They're, you know, the owner just wanted to pay her fair share of what she's accumulated in benefits throughout these years, and that was it. I know.
That is a one case that I had not heard of.
Yeah, I mean, that was my one case also as well. I mean, are there any other like weird situations that have come up in a transaction, like something like that?
In regards to employees?
Yeah. Like for example, that a buyer and a seller should be aware of when it comes to having direct employees.
I mean, many times employees want to take advantage and charge a higher amount, but there's an amount by law.
I mean, charge a higher amount for the finiquito.
For the finiquito.
Okay.
And they want to negotiate. But honestly, you have to pay what the law is. And sometimes they say, oh, can we just do a letter and sign it and not do it before the labor board? I always recommend do it there because if not, they can come forward and it's just going to be a hassle. Yeah. You have it signed and everything, but you know, the best thing is do it the proper way. You have it in your contracts, act upon it, right? If you have it there already, just go to the labor board. It's not a complex situation.
I was there years ago. It's not that complicated.
You as an owner do not even have to go there. The only one that has to go there it could be the accountant and the employee.
So let's just say that an employee wants more than what they're getting, you know, as established by the law. So if they say, no, I'm not going to sign, I'm not going to go, let's say the owner owes, legally the owner needs to pay them 30,000 pesos, let's say, or 3,000 pesos, it could be whatever amount. Can the owner like leave that money with the labor board and say, look, here it is, this is what I owe, this is what you guys are telling me. And then if the employee doesn't go there by such and such date, can they get that money back?
To be honest, I don't know if you can leave it there at the labor board, but the labor board can do the calculation and say this is what corresponds, and they're not entitled to more.
Okay, all right, great.
Either they don't receive anything or they receive that, right?
They receive that amount. Yeah, no, it's weird things happen in transactions, right? We've all seen it.
It does.
You know, I was just thinking, going back to the real estate trust. So let's say the seller is a foreigner and they have a trust, right? And trust is good for how many years here?
if we create a new one, it's 50 years.
50 years.
But also there's some trusts that are with a good bank and you can take over the remaining years. So let's say you have a 50-year trust. In 10 years you sold, there's still 40 years. You can take over that trust, no problem. If it's a good bank, you just assume and you designate your own substitute beneficiaries.
So what are like the pros and cons of opening up a new trust versus just assuming a pre-existing trust?
There's really no cons if it's a good bank. The only thing would be the time frame. So instead of having a 50-year trust, you have a 40, a 30, or how many years are left, but then you can renew that trust again for another 50 years. What do? You save on the permit of foreign affairs. So you save a little bit there, not too much. Permit costs maybe $1,000, but then you have to do a modifying agreement. So maybe you save $600 by assuming and taking over. I mean, really, there's no, I guess the only difference is that when you create a new trust, you can sign some forms and you don't have to be present for closing, right? That it is important to be present at closing because you want to do your walkthrough, right? But if you've done that already and you're fine with the property, when you assume, you have to be here. And if you cannot be here to sign before the notary public, you can grant a power of attorney. If you're in the U.S., that whole process of apostille. What does that mean? That we have to send a double column power of attorney that has the sufficient language.
And who creates the power of attorney document?
Normally, the attorneys, we do. We'll create that in double column precisely for acquiring the rights or selling, right? Sellers always have to be present, but buyers only if you assume existing trust or if you're buying with financing, for example. So then what we do is you have to sign before a notary public in the US or Canada and then send it to get apostilled. If it's not apostilled, it's not a valid document in Mexico. Yeah. So that's the only steps. Yeah, that's the only additional step, let's say.
So if the buyer is opening up a new trust, they don't have to be here. They can if they elect to. If they're not going to be here, they just sign some forms that you guys
authorizing
will send.
The bank to sign on their behalf.
Authorizing the bank to sign on their behalf. But if they're assuming a trust or they're getting a mortgage, they need to be here or give the power of attorney to somebody, right? Okay.
That's for buyers, sellers in every case.
You know, during the pandemic, you know, it was just better to open up a new trust because you know, it was easier, and the Secretary of State offices were closed where they do the apostilles. So
yeah, it was a hassle. So funny because I had clients in the pandemic that were purchasing property. So I was going over, you know, by phone, doing the translation of the document because all the deeds, as you know, are only in Spanish, these 30 to 60 page documents. Yeah. So we were going over them to review and then I would say, oh, so do you know where, you know, this is, just as a reference for them to pay their bank fee, their trust fee. They're like, oh no, I've never been to Puerto Vallarta. And I'm like, you're buying in Puerto Vallarta and you've never been here? Yeah, my friend bought and said it's great there. And it was amazing. And then they came and I met them and they're like so happy with the property. And well, we do have a beautiful, beautiful place here in Puerto Vallarta, but it was amazing to me that they were buying without even being ever in Puerto Vallarta.
That's happened. I mean, people watch like TV shows or they're watching YouTube, and they're just watching other people's lives unfold in Puerto Vallarta, and they contact us, and they buy sight unseen.
It's amazing.
You know, and with technology now, like with WhatsApp video, FaceTime, all of that stuff. So we do virtual tours a lot.
I know.
And they've pretty much seen it all, and they're like, yeah, I'm ready. And they spend sometimes a few $100,000 or millions of dollars.
It's amazing.
On a home.
Amazing. Well, we have in every bracket, don't we?
Yes, we do. So another question I have for you is, going back to post-closing documents. So you mentioned the CFDI. So I want to talk about capital gains tax because this is really important. A lot of people don't realize, you know, there are certain things you should start lining up when it comes time to sell in the future. So you will need that factura complementaria, the CFDI document.
That's to be able to credit the purchase price as a basis.
And if you don't have that, let's say you can't get it.
Let's say you don't have it, what happens is that when you sell, 10% of your sales price would be your basis.
Your basis for the purchase.
Exactly.
So and everything's calculated in pesos, right? It doesn't matter what you bought it in dollars.
It doesn't matter. It's what the exchange rate was when you purchased. And then when you're selling, and you're selling dollars.
Let's say purchase when you sign the deed.
Exactly. Yeah. When you sign the deed, we have an exchange rate, and that will be in your deed, and we're going to use that exchange rate. So today you bought at
Let's
let's
say a
say
million pesos.
$1,000,000.
Mhm.
The exchange rate was whatever,
Mhm.
but that's your price. When you sell, it's the dollars against whatever the exchange rate is. And even if you bought at the exact same price in dollars, but the exchange rate went up, then you have a gain.
You have a gain.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can deduct also your real estate commissions when you're selling. So it's important that the realtor also provides the CFDI because that will make it deductible.
And the transfer tax as well, which is
Transfer tax, and if you do any improvements in your property, also. Only improvements, not furniture, not appliances.
but you need a factura for that too.
You need a factura, the
invoice.
CFDI.
CFDI.
Yeah, everything is digital.
So, in order to get the CFDI, do you have to be a resident?
We can use a generic RFC as a foreigner,
Okay.
right? But eventually,
You have
you
to become a
can get
resident.
your residency, and that is a process that you have to begin in your country of residence with the Mexican consulate, and then process it here locally, and then you have your residency. They asked me, what is the benefit of having that? In reality, you don't have to make that long lineup
At the airport?
at the airport with the Mexican. That's the most, I think, advantageous of having it. You go through the Mexican line instead of all these.
Yeah, the long lines during the holidays. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Sometimes it's an hour and a half, 2 hours to get through.
Well, it's the same going to LA.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
I've gone through it a few times
yes.
over the last 20 years. So going back to something interesting, like if you don't have your CFDI, so that legal invoice, digital invoice. So you said from that million pesos that you spent on the property that's in your deed. So if you don't have the CFDI, when you sell, so they'll take 10% of that, and that's 100,000 pesos.
No, they're going to take 10% of your selling price,
selling price.
not of the purchase price,
Okay.
of what you're selling for. So you're selling for $1 million, they'll take 10% of that as your basis, even if you paid more.
Got it.
But also that applies to deeds that are really, really old and had a very small basis. You're selling today. If the 10% is higher, they'll take that as well. So it goes both ways.
So what is the capital gains tax in Mexico?
So for foreigners, it's 35% of the gain.
Okay.
And for Mexicans, it's really not defined. I can't tell you because it's in a bracket.
Okay.
So it depends on what the sales price is.
Right. So if the foreign seller has all their capital gains tax exemption requirements lined up, so what as of today, what is the maximum they're exempt of their gain?
It's around 5,900,000 pesos with this exchange rate.
Okay.
It's
So that's
maybe
around
200, 250
250-ish or somewhere
per person.
per person.
Yes.
So if you have a couple, so each of them 250, well, the current exchange rate, each of them around 250.
If you meet all the requirements, yes.
And all the requirements right now are what, as of today? Residency?
Residency, but you have to be a fiscal resident. That means that you
Fiscal activity here.
have fiscal activity, right?
So you need a residency, so that would be, you would need a Mexican tax ID number.
A Mexican tax ID number.
Okay. And that's what the fiscal activity is.
Correct.
Okay.
So here you would have utility bills. If it's a couple, you can have electric in one, telephone in the other. Verify that the names are spelled correctly, that the address is the address of the property that you're selling, and then that tax number, the Mexican one, has to be registered onto the utility bill.
Okay.
And then you have to download those invoices, the CFDI that corresponds to each one of these, right? So we do have to follow these steps.
That's why I tell people, you know what, it's a lot to remember, so you need an experienced real estate agent to help guide you through all of this. Because if you think you could do it alone, especially for exemption purposes, it becomes a challenge and frustrating, right? So along that line, would you say people should get a real estate attorney to purchase a property?
Definitely.
Yeah?
I mean, it's good to verify all this before you're selling, not right at the moment.
Or when you're buying.
When you're buying, you want to verify that all the documentation is in order also, but when you're selling, you want to, you have to check both sides, always, right?
Because the notary is a neutral third party, so they're not there to...
They're basically going to receive the documents and process.
And process the transaction.
And they'll tell you yes or no, but you want to be prepared in advance.
And that means you get a professional agent and a real estate attorney.
Correct.
to just kind of work together, collaborate.
Intermediary, yeah.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
So what are some of the pitfalls then that you see buyers, foreign buyers make often over here when they're purchasing?
I mean, basically, when they're not counseled properly, they don't know that they have to send the funds from their personal account or from the account of the trust, what we were discussing. And then that goes through a whole hassle because we can't document it. Sometimes they buy through funds that come from the trust and they put it in their personal name. So what do we need then? We need them to go and apostille all of the documents from the trust. And also then sometimes they want it translated. It's just more of a hassle, more of an expense that could have been avoided if you have this kind of counsel in advance, right?
And have these conversations with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had clients before where they just wired money from their business account in the States to purchase to fund for the purchase of the property here in Vallarta. And the name on the deed is going to be, the person, the individual, and not their company. And so that kind of creates.
And this you have to repeat so many times because sometimes I've discussed this and they say, okay, yes. But then when the time comes for them to send the money, they do it anyway. It's like they have to really register because maybe it's not that important in their country, but here in Mexico, because of money laundering purposes, it's so strict in that regards, right? So we do have to repeat that constantly. It has to come. I've received that so many times. And then they make, even in payments, installments, and then the last one, boom, it comes from a different account. How did that happen, right?
Yeah.
But
like, who is this person?
yes,
What's
a
this,
totally different party.
What's this company?
But maybe they say, oh, I needed this, and I was out of the country, so I asked my brother to send it. That doesn't work, right? You have to really be very clear so they know that funds are coming from the same account, or we have to identify the person.
Sometimes what happens is like a buyer wants to use their attorney, back at home.
Yeah.
Let's say they're in Toronto, they're in New York City. They want their attorney there, and oftentimes, they're great attorneys, but they don't know anything about property ownership in Puerto Vallarta or anywhere else in Mexico.
Yeah.
So in situations like this, it's kind of hard to tell the buyer, you know what, you shouldn't be using your attorney back there. You should find an attorney here. So in these circumstances, like, what do you feel is the best solution?
I get this a lot because everything that they do in the States, they do it through their attorney. And in those cases, I'm basically speaking to the attorney there, and then the attorney is communicating and getting me everything that they need. So it's not an issue. We just have to, bypass all that.
Right.
One important thing I was going to mention is when you buy through a corporation, either Mexican or foreign, now the law has changed a little bit where we need to identify each one of the shareholders. And that has been a little bit of a conflict in some cases because they formed this corporation because they don't want to be identified, but we have to do it now, right? So it's really important to know that we're going to ask for everything, right? Social security number, passports, utility bills, everything is held by the notary. It's not public information, but these are documentation and information that we do need to be able to create a trust.
So that kind of brings me back to the things that you do. So you guys are what we call a closing coordinator, which you don't typically see like throughout the country. So what is the closing coordinator's role? So you've got the real estate agent, you have the buyer, you have the seller, closing coordinator, you've got the notary. So what is the closing coordinator's role in the transaction?
So basically what we do is collect all the information. We draft the document, and this is where we verify that public registry, the city, that everything is paid and current, and then we bring it to the notary office, prepared already, basically to close. But this the notary can do also. Okay. It's just locally, as you say, we have created, and as you know, or do you know, that I was the first one that created this concept. So many
Really?
years
I didn't know
ago.
that.
You did not know?
No.
Yes, this happened like 24 years ago.
You're the founder of the closing coordinator
I truly
term?
was. I truly was. It's a funny story. Do you want to hear it?
I did not know this.
Did you not? Okay, so basically, I was an attorney. I studied law. I still am. I studied law in Guadalajara, and really, it wasn't what I expected. So I came to Puerto Vallarta, and I started working at a notary office. Back then, not too many spoke English. So every American client that would come, the notary would just say, you know, you do this, handle it, handle it. So that's what I did. Then I thought, okay, I'm going to start my own office. What should I do? I didn't want to keep on working for someone. I wanted to go independent. So I went to a realtor that I will omit his name, but I went to the real estate and I said, oh, can I work for you and I'll do all your closings? How much do you want to get paid? So much. I can't afford you. So no. So I went back and I thought, okay, so how can I do this? And that's when I thought, I'm going to create this concept. So I talked to the notaries and said, I'll do all the work, the same kind of review that they have to do. Obviously, they do the review after I finish. I send it to them and they reauthorize and print, and then we sign at the notary office. So I went to a few notaries. They said, yeah, why not? So that's how I opened my business, and I don't charge anything additional.
Okay.
So we share it with the notary because we're doing half of the work and they're doing the other half. And that way we had English and I was able to communicate more because many offices at the time did not have this. I'm talking about 20 years ago. So this is how the concept came along.
I did not know that.
Yes.
So
I opened the door.
you started a whole new industry here because now there are a lot of, other firms
Lots
that
of
are providing similar
Correct.
service.
Yeah.
So you said there's no additional cost, so the buyer doesn't have to pay anything additional to you for this service.
Correct.
So it's an agreement that you have
With the notary.
with the notary, and that's
They don't charge anything additional either. I mean, it's just
kind
a
of like
normal cost.
It's like a free service.
Exactly.
And you got to,
And we tried to do it efficiently to make the timing because I know you realtors like to put fast closings.
Close it by tomorrow.
But we do have some good banks that allow that and some
Yeah.
more difficult banks that don't. So
Yeah.
please check your timings.
So typically, if you're working with a better bank that handles trusts, how long would it take to close? Let's say the seller is a foreigner, and then the buyer is a foreigner, and the seller has a decent trust, with a bank that responds. So how long do you think would normally take? Now we have a lot of holidays in Mexico.
I know we have a lot of holidays, but for our legal process, once you give me all the documents, we can close in 30 days. It could even be less if necessary.
Even with trust involved?
With a trust involved, if it's a decent bank, yes. But I know that you have your contingency period also, right? So that takes a while. So usually you always put 45 days.
45 days, yeah. Sometimes 60, depending on.
That's because most of your contingencies, you have to do your inspections.
Home inspection,
and so on.
yeah, that takes a while.
Exactly.
So 10% of the purchase price, which is, it goes into escrow or goes to the seller. From the closing cost estimate, how much of that does the closing coordinator or the notary need to start the closing process?
We usually ask $3,000 to $4,000 to begin, and that's to order all the documents and do the verification, and then the balance that can go into escrow or sent at closing.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say? Any words of wisdom for people that are considering buying in Puerto Vallarta?
No, it's lovely, and always get counsel.
Yes, always get counsel.
Always
I always say that.
Yeah.
Get a great agent, get a great attorney, because you're gonna and then communicate with them and let them know, like where funds are coming from. Who's going to be on the title. Otherwise nobody wants surprises, and that could delay closing, right?
I mean, super important. I find the most important in the deeds is designate the substitutes properly. We need to get their names as they're in passports. That's why I always ask for the passport of the substitute, because if there's any modification in the name, that's a hassle. Yeah. Right? Because we want to identify them properly, not that they're going to have a problem once you pass. So it's pretty simple to own property here.
Mexico's really big on the name on whatever document matching your government ID. Correct.
And signatures.
And signatures.
The way that you sign your passport is the way that you're going to sign here for the rest of your life. Yeah. Like, practice that. I always say practice before we go to signing. Yeah.
Well, I've never used my middle name in the United States, but here my middle name is on everything, because that's
how you sign your passport.
Well, it's on my passport.
Why did you? No, but when you sign, it says signature of the bearer. You could put a scribble.
My signature doesn't have a middle name. Just my passport has my middle name. So
yeah, so your name is one, but your signature is another.
Yeah. Well, Jessica, this was great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming here. So if somebody wants to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you?
Via email, jessica@riedesser.com.mx. You might want to write that out because you can't even pronounce it.
Riedesser. It's Riedesser.
Correct.
Dot,
Com.
mhm.
.mx.
Jessica
At
riedesser.com.mx.
Correct.
Great, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Great. Telephone also. Can you put that down on the link?
What's your phone number?
322 221 0724.
Got it. See?
You've only been working with me for like 18 years. You still don't know?
I stopped memorizing phone numbers a long time ago. Well, Jessica, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And
Great to be here.
I love the fact that you came here. Thank you.
Thanks.